there, and welcome to this installment of Parenting Plus. I'm your host, Isabel Garcia. In this series, we do deep dives into topics that are impacting moms, dads, families of all shapes and sizes. And in this installment, we are talking all things baby formula, definitely a topic that is near and dear to my heart. I am very excited to bring in our guest with me today. I have Dr. Bridget Young with URMC. She's an associate professor at pediatrics. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm so excited to be here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being here and taking your time and your expertise. And it's a kind of an interesting kind of full circle moment as we talked, where we talked a couple years ago when I had first moved here. And my kids were much younger, several years ago, and we did the story about the study out of URMC that you led that was just really analyzing just the essentially mislabeling that was a result of the packaging when it comes to baby formula and just the when it comes to lactose specifically. So when it comes to, I guess, just an update, on where things stand, with that, I know you had mentioned at the time, this was 2022, where there was kind of the goal to have the FDA look at all of these labels and packaging and how it's presented to the general public. And now that's actively happening, which is definitely needed and long overdue.
It's crazy.
Yes. And so, do you want to just jump in?
Sure. Yeah. So several years ago, we were one of the first groups. We've done a lot of looking at carbohydrate sources in infant formula. And so our lab had looked at associations between different carbohydrate sources and different growth patterns. And also we looked at national purchasing data to say, okay, well, how pervasive or how common is it that families are choosing and feeding a formula that has these different carbohydrate sources? And we found that it was actually really, really common. One of our studies found that over 60% of powdered formula purchased is lactose reduced, meaning using a carbohydrate or a sugar that's not lactose, which is the carbohydrate in breast milk. And there's limited medical reasons why that would be prescribed, for example. So it's probably more common than it, for example, is medically necessary.
Okay.
Yes. And so we had talked about, well, does the FDA regulate it? And I was like, well, no. And then I remember you asking, like, how does that happen? I said, it's a long process. And here we are years later, and it's actually happening.
Yes, it's finally happening.
Yes.
And I believe it's called Operation Stork Speed, where they are doing a comprehensive analysis of just everything top to bottom. And when it comes to, the FDA required nutrients that are in it, I understand there's, a few dozen, about 60 or so right now. I'm curious, what are your hopes, now seeing this moment finally happen, and what are the changes, and then what could come of this, when, all of this analysis is completed?
Yeah. Okay. Well, before I even answer that, I just want to be clear, because this can be really scary for parents to see, like, oh, the FDA is revisiting, because I've had a lot of families ask, was there something wrong with the formula we have now? And so I want to be super clear. Absolutely not. The formula we have now is the safest food on the market. It's very tightly regulated. You can feel very wonderful about how you're nourishing your baby if you're using any formula that's available in the U.S. But what the FDA is doing now, we in research in pediatrics, a lot of people who do formula work have been calling for this for years and years. So this is all good news, and there's no negativity to be had. So the FDA regulates the vitamins and minerals and the macronutrients like the fat and the protein that go into formula, to ensure that if you are only feeding your baby formula, that they grow and they grow well and they thrive. This is a really big deal. Yeah. The second thing the FDA does is they have very strict safety regulations, which also makes sense to us, that if you're feeding, our most vulnerable, tiniest citizens, they deserve extra care and extra attention to ensure that food is safe. So there's sort of two prongs to the FDA's role. What Operation Stork Speed is doing, it is revisiting the current regulations to make sure they are up to date, there's been a lot of research that has happened since the last time.
Okay.
There was a full review of all the nutrients, which was before I was born.
Oh, wow.
So a lot has, I mean, not a lot has changed and not a lot has changed. You know, we still need iron.
Yes.
So a lot of it is really simple nutrition science.
Right.
So what they're doing now is they are revisiting all of those regulations, and it's really this is very exciting if you're a research nerd, because we're very much in the weeds right now. Maybe I can come back when everything is published and we know actually what the FDA has changed or not changed. But the current administration has certainly set goals or set priorities for things they would like to see changed. And then recently they just had a panel of experts share suggestions. They had an open time for comment from anyone, from researchers, from pediatricians, from parents, to be able to submit what they would like to see updated or changed. That time has now closed. So now the FDA is actually sorting through all those things.
All that info.
And I mean, I don't think any of us think the government moves particularly quickly.
Right. Yes.
So we don't know when the final the final changes will be released, but we have a good idea of what might be coming based on what priorities have been stated. So we can talk about those if you want.
Yes, absolutely. I was going to say, let's dive into the priorities, because I know that, in that study you had mentioned, a couple of years ago, it was all about the labeling and the presentation of it. And so I assume that will eventually be applied here, in some capacity.
I hope so. Sure, we can talk about a couple different things. And then you interrupt me if, I don't know, you're really interested in one of them.
Sure.
So when Operation Stork Speed was announced, a few things that the administration called out particularly were they wanted to introduce additional safety testing for things like heavy metals. So currently the US or the FDA does not require heavy metal testing for infant formula. And I'm sure we all, there was a Consumer Reports study that came out recently. Now, I want to be clear again, because that can be really, really scary for parents to hear. It's usually not a cause for alarm. And I will say, I can't say all, but the vast majority of infant formula companies do some testing on their own. Okay. It's not required by law, and they don't have to submit the results to the FDA because it's not required. But there is a lot of testing that goes on. Okay. Formulas from other countries, certain other countries do require heavy metal and pesticide testing. So certain formulas that are now legal here but are manufactured in other countries already kind of have to adhere to dual standards. So it's really wonderful. I think that's something we can all agree on, right? Let's absolutely make sure we have safe levels of arsenic and lead and, not undetectable.
Right. Absolutely.
But,
measurable.
So it's probably not as bad as everyone worries when they see the really scary headlines, which get a lot of clicks about heavy metals and baby formula. But that was set by the administration as something that they wanted to expand. And then the panel of experts that was convened made a lot of suggestions around things like expansion of potential oils that can be included in infant formula so that we have oils in addition to seed oils that are approved for use. There was discussion about carbohydrate sources and potentially adding some regulation around when and how non-lactose carbohydrates like table sugar can be used in infant formula. Okay. But again, those things are at this point suggestions. Sure. And so we're waiting to, hear the final ruling from the FDA whenever that comes.
Absolutely. And that's so fascinating because I think that, in just preparing for this, looking at, the specifics and when you get really into the kind of nitty gritty details, as you mentioned, the headline of, arsenic level testing, it looks super alarming and obviously
oh my gosh, so scary.
Cause for concern not to, not validate that at all, but to say there's a lot of nuances, I think, that go into this.
Yes.
And so when it comes to, especially, maybe speaking with parents, that are new parents, because I definitely recall, I mean, you're just so sleep deprived and just looking for a simple solution just to have your baby fed and in a healthy manner. And so when, parents at any stage really, but especially for new parents that are seeing all these changes happen, what's your message to them in just navigating, knowing, okay, there needs to be changes that are coming, but it doesn't necessarily have to be, all at once, and it's not super extreme necessarily, but there is a need for updating, if you will.
Yeah, everything needs to be updated every now and then. Yeah. Well, when I talk with parents, I like to remind them, especially when they're hearing a lot of the stuff that's happening on the national level, or national recommendations, national regulations, that these types of regulations or studies, like the consumer report studies, you can think about them, and I do this sort of wearing two hats. So the first hat, the professional hat that I wear and that all of us have to try to put on, is your public health hat. So let's take the consumer report about heavy metals for an example.
Sure.
That data is super useful. Absolutely, I want to know what level of heavy metals are in formula if I'm a regulator. The FDA found that study very helpful. The Consumer Reports was, very transparent about sharing the data with them. That we don't know, but I'm guessing is maybe one of the things that led to setting heavy metal testing as a priority. Okay, take that hat off, put your parenting hat on. You don't need to put this one on. You guys are living this every single day.
Right.
The relevance that has to your individual, special, unique, precious baby can be little to none. So couple quick examples with the heavy metals. The heavy metal formula testing they did was on 1 to 2 lots of formula. Heavy metals in formula come from the ingredients themselves, not, for example, contamination from a line. So anytime an ingredient source changes, anytime even the lot of an ingredient source changes, you could have a totally different result. Wow. So even if your formula, had a red X next to it on that report, that doesn't mean that your can of that formula had that red X. So changing may or may not make any much of a difference. Then, we don't have to get into it, but we can do the math about how much is your baby actually drinking.
Yes.
It's not getting anywhere near toxic levels, even if you are exclusively formula feeding your baby. And so, do I want to know those from a public health standpoint? Yes. Would I take that and tell anybody to change their formula based on those results? I actually wouldn't.
Excellent.
Yeah, one of my number one mottos is, if your baby is healthy and thriving, you did it. You found the perfect formula for your family. Stick with it and save that stress for potty training.
Absolutely.
Yes. You'll need it later.
It comes. Right. Absolutely. And yes. And, this is something that you've mentioned, quite a few times that I think is just so important, is just the, a fed baby is a fed baby. There's no ifs, ands, or buts in between. And, of course, we just want the healthiest options, that are for our children. And so when it comes to, I guess, understanding, you mentioned this a couple of times too, the carbohydrates and how that applies to sugars and just the breast milk analysis too. So how does that apply then to, what's in our formulas, what's in the powder formula?
Yeah, let's talk about it. And I'll give the same sort of overarching disclosure first, that all of these ingredients are safe. All of them grow a baby beautifully. They go through extreme testing to ensure that before they're even allowed in formula. So if you are using a formula that has corn syrup or sucrose, which is table sugar, this is no time to panic. If your baby's doing great, stick with it.
Right.
From a federal regulation level, we want to be making recommendations that, do our population the best service possible. So lactose is the carbohydrate in breast milk. And almost all babies are designed to drink lactose, even though a lot of adults have a lot of issues with lactose.
Oh, yes.
Those, you don't really see those in infants. So as I mentioned earlier, a lot of infant formula purchase does take some of that lactose out and replace it with different carbohydrates like corn syrup or maltodextrin or table sugar. There's a very small list, because babies are not just tiny adults. They can't have beet fiber. They don't have, their intestines are not ready for that. So there's a very small list of carbohydrates they can digest. Now, there's no conclusive evidence that these other carbohydrates provide any harm. So you want a randomized control trial with firm outcomes that's well designed. We don't have that study. We have some studies that are observational, some studies where we're looking at data that was collected for a different purpose that make us think there's a possibility or an association between drinking a formula with a lot of corn syrup solids as opposed to lactose, and, for example, a difference in the microbiome, a potential risk of elevated weight or overweight in childhood. But again, it's not proven. So the FDA functions with, they have to have traditionally a proven harm to say no. Other countries take a different stance when they regulate their formula and say, okay, if there's maybe a risk, these are babies, we'll go ahead and regulate. We'll be more conservative. So that's just like a difference in approach, which came to a head during the shortage when we were trying to
I was going to mention the shortage.
Yeah. So this is a little bit of the background that I think has also led to why we're revisiting guidelines now.
Taking like a more holistic approach and everything.
And so one of the recommendations that we've had from a couple different federal agencies, a National Academy of Sciences panel that I was on, and some from this expert panel that was just convened, was saying, okay, carbohydrates are an example. We have different ways of regulating them internationally, and we've sort of moved to an international economy. We have foreign formulas here. So does it make sense for the FDA to move to function a little more similarly to these other countries so that we have a quicker option to import formula when we have another shortage? That was really scary.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
And so there's a little bit of a recommendation to push there to say, all right, FDA, maybe we should regulate carbohydrates the way other countries do, which isn't to say everything has to be lactose, but set parameters about when other sugars can be used, and when they are used, how much. Can you replace all the lactose? Can you replace half the lactose? And the answer to each of those depends on the country, but also depends on the medical indication for the formula. So you have different rules for hypoallergenic formulas. You have different rules for partially hydrolyzed formulas, which are, all made for babies who might be having different digestive issues.
Yes. Yeah. And I recall, and as we chatted too, before the interview, just my daughter had the lactose intolerance, and I did the whole, no dairy. There was a point where I did no soy.
So you ate nothing.
Yeah,
nothing
pretty
left.
much. Lots of fresh veggies and meat. But I recall too during that time just being so overwhelmed by the amount of information. And I just can imagine families, even, my daughter's 7 now. And so, even within the last 7 years, just the rapid rate at which information has come out and all the changes and stuff. So when it comes to, if you can talk a little bit about the lactose intolerance, formulas and how the makeup of the compounds work and what we might be seeing with these regulations as it applies to those types of formulas.
Okay, great. Yes. Well, first of all, if your baby is having an issue and you think it might be the formula, number one, call your pediatrician. They work for you. They want to hear from you. They want to help you. They want to hear from you if you're thinking about changing formula. They probably have a recommendation. So start there. They know your unique baby's medical history. Okay. If you want to talk just in general terms, lots of infants have digestive issues. You know this. Even exclusively breastfed term babies who are our gold medical standard have gas, have blowouts, cry from little cramps when they're passing their stools. It is hard to be a baby.
It is.
It is.
It's a lot of work.
It is so much work to
being a
be
new
out
human
in the world,
and
having all your organs work at the same time on their own. It's a lot. So a lot of times it's really hard to just see your baby being uncomfortable and not having anything to do about it. So there's just a learning curve there.
Sure.
Lots of parents think their baby might have lactose intolerance because you recognize the same symptoms, which probably are the same symptoms that you have when you're lactose intolerant. But the vast majority of the time, like I said, it's not the lactose that could be causing discomfort in the baby. The vast majority of the time, if it's really a tolerance issue, it's the protein source. So, and then we can get into looking at the protein source. Everybody usually knows if they're feeding a dairy or soy formula, but there's a lot of nuance and variation even in dairy formulas. And so you find out the variation by looking at the list of ingredients. And it'll be in the first 2 or 3. So it's a scary long list.
Yes.
All formula labels.
Tiny print.
Oh my gosh, it's really overwhelming. Don't panic. Flip it over. By
first
law,
3.
Every formula label will have the first major ingredients, and then there'll be a bolded term that says and less than 2% or and less than 1%. I said just ignore all of that, which is going to be like 80% of the ingredients. Those are your vitamins, your minerals, the stuff that has to be there that doesn't really vary very much. The first couple are going to be your protein source, your carbohydrate source, your fat source. So you can identify your protein source. It'll be like skim milk or whey or casein. And that's likely where baby's tolerance comes from. So what you want to do from there is talk to your pediatrician. but select a formula that changes the protein source.
Okay.
In a way that you think might help. So maybe going with more whey, or maybe moving to a partially hydrolyzed protein source.
Okay.
Or what I see a lot of times that breaks my heart is parents, no fault of their own, end up choosing a formula that's almost identical.
Oh dear.
And then they go through a whole formula switch and nothing changes and everybody's demoralized and baby still has gas that is keeping them up at night. Yeah. Yes. So looking at those first couple ingredients can make a huge difference in just understanding where you are and what you can change.
Absolutely. Excellent. That is super helpful. And I appreciate that insight so much, just because just the sheer letters and, names of all these ingredients can just be deprived. So overwhelming. Yes. And all you want is just the thing that works. But, interesting thing that you just brought up too is just again, kind of coming back to the nuance, but, that it just takes time too, for the babies to see if that works. It's almost like starting a new, medication. But, obviously when it comes to just food and stuff, when you're trying to navigate what the best option is, it doesn't necessarily happen instantaneously. You give the next formula and then all of a sudden everything's better.
Right. Usually the opposite. Usually it takes a little time. Which it can be hard.
Absolutely. And so when it comes to going back to Operation Stork Speed, obviously there's no, as you mentioned, timeline as to when we're going to see all of this. Can you talk about, your role? I know you mentioned, that you were sitting on one of the panels and one of the boards recently, but if you can just give a little, deep dive into, URMC's role in all of this too, and, kind of coming full circle with that study all those years ago and how this is now finally coming to fruition, at this level.
Yes. So I'm personally in URMC is not involved in Operation Stork Speed.
Okay.
I was very privileged to be a member of the National Academy of Sciences Committee that was convened after the shortage. Congress mandated the National Academy of Sciences to convene a panel of experts to address industry concentration and supply chain, again, after the shortage, with the goal of this panel looking at the body of evidence, talking to experts, and bringing their own expertise to make recommendations to shore up our country's capacity for formula. Basically with the subtext being like, this was terrible, and let's be sure this never happens again. If we can't feed our own babies, what are we doing?
Right.
Yeah. So
baseline.
Yes, as I said, I was very privileged to be a member of that, and that was prior to Operation Stork Speed. But that committee did make many recommendations, many of which the FDA has already started to adopt, which is really exciting. Again, all of those recommendations weren't necessarily relating to regulation of nutrients, but more regulation of and shoring up supply chains. So working with companies to make sure they have what's called risk redundancy plans. So, if your supplier of cottonseed oil runs out, where are you going to get it?
Right.
Really simple things like that.
Okay.
But it did make recommendations that we've seen made again for our Operation Stork Speed for the FDA to do things like provide lists of nutritionally suitable alternatives for every formula. So parents don't have to panic when there's a shortage or do this research on their own in the middle of the night. They have a resource to go to so they know, okay, this one's out. Here are 3 other relatively comparable products that my baby will likely switch to well and not have a tolerance reaction. So that's something that kind of crosses between the two.
Just simplifying. And it's, an interesting trend too, as you talk about, just the economy becoming more, global and, how that's impacting policies and regulations just to ensure, everything's shored up as you mentioned. And just how that applies too to the nuance of every child is so individual and so specific. And I can imagine, that must be very complicated, anything at a national level, but trying to apply something that, is a kind of blanketed system, when there is, all these nuances that come into it. And so when it comes to talking about the specifics, and I wanted to touch on, and we have a couple minutes left, but obviously all of the information that's out there, social media, and all of the different ways that people are getting their information. You mentioned, and I had Dr. Weinberg on last week actually talking about the vaccine recommendations, and just, he kept saying, I was asking him, where can people get this info from? You gave the example about, how this is now kind of going to be applied into the policy that it looks like the FDA is going to adopt with those recommendations for just the alternative options. But
yes, I hope so.
Yes. When it comes to, seeking that information, he kept referencing, just go to your pediatrician.
Yeah.
When it comes to navigating, just understanding this information and, for those vulnerable parents as well, looking for just the direction to go, what is the best option when it comes to seeking credible information?
Yeah, so I'm going to echo Dr. Weinberg. The first place to go is call your pediatrician. You can reach out to us at Breastfeeding Medicine at the University of Rochester. We have these discussions all the time. We're happy to help and walk you through selecting a formula or dealing with formula tolerance. And then, there is a lot of stuff on social media. Some of it's great. Some of it's not. And I will just remind parents, this, your baby is special and unique. So a formula that worked really well for some influencer or even your neighbor or your sister-in-law who mean well, like their baby is different from your baby. And so finding the perfect formula for you may be different from them. And I know the options can be really overwhelming, but I try to say can also be really empowering because it's out there. There is a formula, if you're using formula that, we can find that's going to keep your special, unique baby comfortable. And sometimes it just takes a little detective work to get there.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank you so very much. We are wrapping up. Now, you mentioned too, in terms of resources that parents can access, your kind of system there at URMC. Yes. And so just resources that are out there, just as a reminder for the community too. Obviously we're seeing more incorporation of like the breastfeeding and feeding rooms for moms, across the state. Amazing. New York has done incredible stuff, to allow those spaces to be created and exist. And when it comes to just learning too, or breastfeeding help and formula help, where else can parents seek that information?
Yes. So again, your pediatrician, you're welcome to call us at URMC. We have a telelactation clinic now, so you can book an appointment within, 15 minutes.
Oh, wow.
Because we all know if you have a feeding problem, it is a now problem.
Oh, yes.
So we're really trying to meet families where they are. We have nights and weekend appointments. If you are in WIC, talk to your WIC liaison. They have registered dietitians who support families through both breastfeeding problems and formula tolerance issues. I have a personal website called babyformulaexpert.com that just walks parents through how to read a label, what words mean with protein, what words mean carbohydrates, so you can kind of do a little bit of that detective work yourself. And then also trust your intuition. This baby was sent to you and you know things about that baby that no other professional does. We're here to be a team with you to find that perfect feeding journey.
Well, I really appreciate all of your insights, Dr. Bridget Young. Thank you so much for joining me. And I appreciate too the just perspective that there's all this information out there, but how that can really be kind of used to empower parents.
That's the goal. Yes.
Excellent. And we'll be happy to do a follow-up when we find out the recommendations from the FDA.
I'd love to. That would be fun.
Fantastic. Excellent. Well, we want to thank everyone so much for joining us for this installment of Parenting Plus, and we'll see you again next time.
Get the Rochester First streaming app today for everything you love from News 8 On Demand, plus exclusive shows you won't see anywhere else. Search ROC and download for free on Roku, Amazon Fire, and Apple TV.